behind. It's 3 cars in it. Okay. Did you ever hear the saying that Toich Dibur is the amount of time that it takes to say Shalom Alecha Rabbi Umari? Right?
Yeah.
Where did we get it from? Why isn't it testing 1, 2, 3? Like where did we get that saying from? So why is that used as testing 1, 2, 3? So today we're going to unlock that mystery. We had in the Masechta certain runs that we need to remember because they're the classic runs of this Masechta. Like, just for instance, one run we learned about talking about the Chiv of Talmud Torah. Even if you learned Kol HaTorah Kula, the Ran teaches us that there's a mitzvah to learn 24/7 every second that you have. That was one of the big runs. There was the other run that says you're allowed to die for someone to die if there's no hope for them and you're suffering, right? That was also one of the big runs. There were some other big runs that unfortunately I don't remember off the top of my head now, but there were some major. Oh yes, there was the run with Breyer Light. How if when we originally purchased a field in partnership and it's not big enough to split up, it's treated like a timeshare. So you don't need Breyer really because we each own half of the property based on a schedule that will be populated in the future. So the Ran said that doesn't need Breyer. So that's so how many things is that so far? That's 3.
4.
That's 4. The first thing was Talmud Torah. Second thing was you're allowed for someone to die. Third thing was Breyer. What's the fourth? So there's a fourth thing too. I think this is going to be number 5. Today we're going to learn the halacha of Toich Kedei Dibur, which is Shalom Alecha Rabbi Umayri. We're going to learn the side of that. But before we start today, I just want to quickly review what we learned yesterday. Yesterday we were struggling to understand Shmuel. Shmuel Paskin, like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri in our Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said in our Mishnah that if a woman makes a koine to prohibit her husband from having enough from her ma'aseh yadayim, she can't. They're mishubatim. But he still recommends that the husband make a farah because what if he divorces her sometime in the future? At that point, the nether will be chal because at that point her ma'aseh yadayim are no longer mishubit to her husband, and that's not going to prevent him from ever remarrying her because he will be usher to have enough from her ma'aseh yadayim. So therefore, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says he recommends is good practice, even though you don't plan on divorcing your wife, and even if you do, you don't plan on remarrying her. So even though you don't think it's relevant, but it's good practice to be made for her Nedarim, even though they're not relevant for now, even though now her ma'aseh yadayim are meshubah to you, and you can't answer them. That's what Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said, and Shmuel Paskin like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. And the Gemara had a kasha on Shmuel, because elsewhere Shmuel Paskin, that a husband cannot be makdish the ma'aseh yadayim of his wife for the future, because ein adam makdish davar shaloi b'loilam. That's a pretty accepted principle. Ein adam makdish davar shaloi b'loilam. So if a person cannot be makdish davar shaloi b'loilam, how is it that Shmuel can paskin like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri that this woman today can answer her ma'aseh yadayim of the future? Ein adam makdish davar shaloi b'loilam, and if she cannot answer her ma'aseh yadayim of the future, why does Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri say that you need to be made for the nether to deal with that problem? Right? That was the problem that we were dealing with. The Gemara answered the Maskana, a very big chiddush. Shiny kainamois the kedushas haguf dami, and Rava told us that kedushas haguf trumps a shibud, and we learned hektish, hametz, v'shikver, mafkin midei shibud. So we're going to focus on hektish. If she made her ma'aseh yadayim hektish, and as Rashi holds, it's kedushas haguf. It's like she made the ma'aseh yadayim into a carbon, then it will trump the shibud, and therefore her neder to aser her ma'aseh yadayim to her husband will be chal. Frek the Gemara, if that's the shita of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, so why does Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri say be made for the neder? Because in the future, if you divorce her, you don't want her ma'aseh yadayim to become usher. Right now, her ma'aseh yadayim will become usher. If her koinim can even trump the shibud that's on her ma'aseh yadayim to her husband. So for that, the Gemara answered with the Bach injecting what the Gemara says in Ksubas is that even though technically the hektish could trump the shibud, almua rabbanan l'shibud d'abal. When it comes to shibudim, of marriage, the Chachamim gave it an extra level of strength and said it will be resistant to the power of hektish. Therefore, the way the Ram fears is, right now her neder won't be chal. But even though they said that she will not allow the hektish to trump the shibud, that's only lagabe right now. But lagabe the future, it will trump it, and therefore he needs to be made for her neder, not for now, because almur abon l'shibude and her neder won't be chal, but for the future they will allow her neder to be chal, and therefore Rabbi Yochanan Meduri and Shmuel pastors like him holds that the husband should be made for the neder. Right? That was the Meskana of the Sugya. Now we learned the Mishnah of someone who made a hafara, a mistaken hafara. Nodra ishtoi v'savar shenodra bitoy. His wife made a neder, and he thought it was his daughter, or vice versa. Nodra bitoy v'savar shenodra ishtoi. Or it wasn't a mistake on who made the neder, but it was a mistake on the content of the neder. Nodra b'nozer v'savar shenodra b'karben. Nodra b'karben v'savar shenodra b'nozer. And Duvi asks why so many examples of the same principle over and over again, which I don't have the answer to. His afara is invalid because it was based on a mistake, and therefore he has to be made for again. Now this Mishnah is talking about afara. What do you think would be with Hakama? What if you were Mekayim, your wife made a neder, you thought it was your daughter, and you were Mekayim it. Then you find out it wasn't your daughter, it was your wife. Does your kiyum work? Clearly, our Mishnah says that the afara doesn't work. Does the kiyum work? So that's what we have to look at the Ran for. And the Ran says, actually, before we still do the Ran, because it's really on the Gemara, we'll just learn the one line in the Gemara. Lememra diyani oisa dafkahu. It says in the pasuk when it's discussing the ability for a husband to be made for his wife's nedarim. Himheni avia oisa. That's talking about her father. B'yom shamay. Kol nedereh v'esareh asher asra nafsha lo yokum. Hashem yisachlo. Why? Kiheni avia oisa. So it's talking about the father. The father was mefer oisa. That neder, that woman specifically. So we learn from the oisa that the hafara requires precision. It has to be hafara for the right person, hafara for the right neder. That is the makar. Now, this is speaking about hafara. Do we have a pasuk that's talking about hakama? Does hakama have the same requirement? I don't know. So for that, we have to look at the Heligaran. Remember the Yoni Oisa Dafkahu. The Chivon Dechsiv Oisa, since it says Oisa, Mashma Sheyofer L'Shem Oisa Shenadra, the hafar has to be L'Shem, the person who he was noted for V'loi Sheyita B'Isha Acheres. There shouldn't be a mistake with another wife. V'kachali, correct Iran, I have a little bit of a problem. Kivin de my Oisa Mapik Law. Since do we learn it from Oisa, which is talking about Afara, Ba'afara Diksev Oisa. So that's what this rule should apply to. Avo b'hakama minolan hai dechasivna b'masnizin vis-a-vis the sefta. We do find in Mishnayos and the sefta that there's an issue with kiyum as well being done properly. Where do you know that from? We only have a pasuk referring to Afara. Zok Iran v'chitem. If you want to argue, we have a famous hekesh, right? It says Isha Yikimenu B'Isha Yiferenu. So shouldn't you know from the hekesh, whatever halacha you learn regarding Afara should apply to Akama and vice versa? Zokteran, that wouldn't help us. Like we learned earlier. And we learned from there, we applied a halacha by Hakama to a halacha by Afara. So by the same token, why don't we use this hekesh to teach us that kiyum as well has to be done correctly? Rabbi Kiva Nami Lakaman, and shortly we're going to learn today, Rabbi Kiva makes a hekesh from Afar Lakama, Ma'akama Mimenu, Afafar Mimenu. That's referring to, just like Hakama, you could make Hakama on part of a nether, and it'll be Mekayim the whole nether. So too, Hafar should work the same way. Even the Islam Ba'afar, the Isa Dafka, so yes, let's use this same hekesh to apply the halacha of Isa. That will not work. because in fact you cannot use the hekesh for everything. Even if you hold there is such a hekesh, you'll have to agree. You can't say that hafara and akama have the identical principle, and the Ran's going to prove that unequivocally. Halachas that we learn about either one, hakama or akama, from that actual pasuk, those halachas are the only halachas that we're going to apply this hekesh to. But other halachas that we know about akama and hafara that have nothing to do with what that pasuk is discussing, that you couldn't use the hekesh for, including the isa that we have in our suit. And I'll prove it to you, Dr. Ram. We just learned the Mishnah earlier, the Bryce earlier. We learned that there's certain chumras that apply to a kama and not a farah, like kaim believe by kaim, but hafer believe by animal. If you were mekayim it in your heart without speaking out that it's mekayim, it works. If you're going to tell me that there's a total hekesh between a kama and a farah, how could the Bryce make that distinction? The only thing that we're going to apply from one to the other, from Akama to Afara, are halachas that we learn out of that pasuk where it says Isha Yikimenu, Isha Yifirenu. The lavakeshu, because it's not really a technical hekesh to follow all the rules of hekesh. It's just the fact that they're together, the Isha Yikimenu, Isha Yifirenu. So then back to our square one kasha, how do you know this halacha by Akama? The Chivin Shekain Tenich Ba'afar the Chsivaisa Hakama Minolam. The after Dr. Ram, there's another pasuk with a similar word by Hakama itself. The after the law the Chsiv Ba'Hakama the Chsiv Kihechlish law the Yom Shamai. So the law to her is similar to the Isa by the Afar. Kihechlish law is Isa Dami Umash Medafta. So there's a pasuk. So the Ram concludes. There's a pasuk of Isa which our Gemara discusses regarding Afara. And there's a pasuk of a law that the Ran is telling us regarding Hakama. Now that we've established that Hakama and Afara have the same halacha, lagabi precision, mikanir li halacha, the Baal einay made for lishtei nashav ka'achas, the same way the Gemara said the Pashtus, that if he has two different wives and they each made another, he can't say mufrloch, and it should work for each one. The Oisa dafka, because Oisa also tells you that only one woman is he able to refer to. Hachanami, this rule should apply to Kiyam as well, because of the law. The law is dafka. Beautiful. So now we know both Akama and Afara are subject to this rule that you have to get the right person. Correct the Gemara, your whole premise from being medayik from Oisa, which is a little bit of a specific type of word, Oisa, her, you got to know who it is you're referring to. When you make together, the whole premise is mistaken. You cannot make such a diak from such a word. And I'll show that to you from the halacha of Avelus. We learned the halacha of Avelus from the story when Shaul and Yonasan were killed. Shaul HaMelech, David HaMelech was misabel over them. But Gabe Karoy, when it comes time to Reishing Kriya, which is the word that the Gemara is using to describe Avelus, the Chsiv al. It says the word al referring to each individual nifter. The Chsiv al Shol v'al Yonasan b'noi. The pasuk says, "Vayispedu, vayivku, vayitzumu ata erev." So they feared with full Avelus. Al Shol v'al Yonasan b'noi. There's a double al there, and the Rosh tells us. I'm sorry. But those aren't referring to people. And the Rosh tells us over here, what did we learn from these owls? The Shema'inan Mina, the Al Kol Meis, Sarach Lekroya. We actually learned a halacha in Hilchos Avelus, that you have to have a separate Avelus, meaning a separate Kriya for each individual Meis, Midichsiv Al Shol, Al Yonisah. So if someone Rachaman Litzlan loses two loved ones, they can't write Kriya once. They have to write Kriya once for each loved one that they lost. So if that's what you learn from there, that means from the al we're darshaning. If you're darshaning the al, use al like we use oisa here as well, and that means you have to know who you're writing kriya for. So if you write kriya thinking that it was your father who died and it really was your son, that shouldn't be a good rice in Kriya. But the problem is that's not the halacha, because it does say al there, and if you follow our logic as to how we analyze Yosy, that should say that if you rice Kriya thinking it was your father and it was really your son, it shouldn't be good. But Vitanya, if they inform somebody that he lost his father, and he rice Kriya, and then he found out that it wasn't his father who died. It was, in fact, his son who died. Yotzi de Kriya, you would still be Yotzi. So you see clearly you can't make such a diak from Al, and therefore you shouldn't be able to make such a diak from Isa. It all depends on how specific he was. This brisa is speaking where they didn't tell him Esav. It says Mesav. It's lav dafka the round tell. They told him he died. I guess he knew his father was sick, and they came in and told him he died. So he assumed it was his father, but it really was not his father. So he made an assumption without specifically knowing that he's rising Kriya for his father. That's stam. That will work. That's why it's not a kasha. Our Mishnah that says there's a problem is when he didn't just think and he was Mefer. He said, I want to be Mefer, my wife's Neder. Turned out being his daughter. That's where it wouldn't work. Zokta Gemara, and not a kasha, we have a raya from a brisa that says this very clearly. If they told him his father died, Vikar and he rice Kriya, and then it turned out it was a son, which is very similar to our Mishnah. When you're specific of who you're rising Kriya for and it's wrong, you're not Yotze because it says Al, just like Bala says Isa. But Amru loy mace, they told him he died. Uchesaver avavu, and he only assumed that it was his father. Vikara and he rised Kriya for his father. The Achagach nimtza benoy, and it turned out being his son. Yotzi de Kriya. So you see in this brayta that distinction. So our Mishnah is speaking where he specifically said, "I want to be made for my daughter's nether or my wife's nether." Turned out being wrong. That won't be a good affair. Similar to this case where he said, "I'm rising Kriya for my father. I'm rising Kriya for my son," and he was wrong. But if he stam rised Kriya, that would not be a contradiction to the Al or to the Isa. The only difficulty with this pshat is we have to kvetch the first brisa, and we have to say that the first brisa means not Abul Meis Aviv. They told him Meis Meis, and he assumed it was his father. Because this has to be this brisa that says the Kriya is good has to be a case of stam. So it's not gishmak to kvetch the words. But as far as our teretz, we have a good teretz to fan for our Mishnah. Rav Ashi says, I'm uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable with what you're saying over here because I don't want to make it lav dafka. I agree with your halach. There is a definite difference between tam and mefarish. But I'm going to show you that even in the case of mefarish, sometimes it will still work. So this is in fact the case of mefarish. Dr. Bashi, if you were mefarish, how could the kriya work? Dr. Bashi, a new chiddush in halach. Rav Ashi Omer kan b'toich k'dei diber, kan la'acher k'dei diber. In the first price, where even though he died, he made kriya 100% L'Shem's father, and he was wrong. It turned out being his son. There's still a way where he could be Yotzi the kriya. When he found out that it was his son who died. So basically, his mindset, it's like the 7-second time delay that they have in radio and television. His mindset will still work for the son. How does that work? That's what the Ran's going to teach us, the mechanics of why Toich K'dei Dibur still works. Because if you think about it, why should it work? I rise clear with my father. I can't apply it to my son. How does that work? So we're going to see in a second.
It's like we're pulling back an email. Regret sending it.
That's right. You could do it.
Yeah.
Had Amrit lo yatsi dekriya. And this Had Amrit lo yatsi dekriya. And this is when he didn't. This is when he didn't. And where did we say you're not yotze? That's la'acher kedei Vatanya, and I'm going to give you an example of how this works. Someone had someone in his household who was very, very sick. Vinis Aleph, and this choila passed out. And the loved one thought that this person died. Vikara, so he writes Priya. And it turned out that he was alive at the time, but he died shortly after that. His Kriya is not good, because when he writes Kriya, the mace was not a mace. But Amar Rab Shimon ben Pazi, Amar Yeshua ben Levi, Mishum Bakapara, Lo Shanu El Shemes Achar Chededibur. That only works if that's only a problem that his Kriya is not good if there was a 5 second or more or 3 second or more delay between his Kriya and the death. But if the death was right away, we say Kedibur Dami, and his Kriya will work. So the same way the Kriya will work for someone who died later, the Kriya could also work for a son instead of for the father if the father was alive. The Hilchasa and Allah Lamaisa, Kedibur Dami. In fact, Kedibur is considered at the same time, which the Ran is going to elaborate on. There's only 4 exceptions to the rule. Megadif. If you curse Hashem, you can't take Teichel Dibur. I change my mind. You still get your punishment. Serving Avodah Zarah, saying Ela Kecha Yisrael. You say that, can't take that back. And the longest sentence in the English language, I do. Umekadesh umegare. No, because I'm trying to say it's a real God. Lamaisa, it's not. So therefore, I'm trying to say it's Elakecha. I'm trying to say this is the Kedusha. That's what I mean to say. Technically, I'm wrong. So that's why I wasn't sure how to express it. So before we go weiter, before we get into the lumdis,
The 3 second rule and you dropped on the other 4.
exactly, it didn't really happen. So before we get into the lumdis, I want to get into the important things. When my grandfather was in the hospice dying, one day it was a shared room. There was another Yid there, and one day my brother was sitting with my grandfather, and the Chaver Kadisha barges in and starts taking his roommate. And his roommate says, "No, ich lebe noch." So the Chaver Kadisha says, "No problem, we'll come and get you next week." So that was so. Dave Zolti always says over a story where once upon a time, Motcha Nussbaum was in the hospital, and Heshi was with his father in the hospital, and Dave Zolti and Bubu Zlanik and Rudy Mann, they all came to visit. So Heshi was by the door in the corridor, but by the door of his father's room, and he sees these guys coming. So he tells his father, "Hati de Chaver Kadisha kim."
Oh, come on.
This is the story that Dave Zolti said. So Avigdor said the best story, where you understand this Gemara. His grandmother was very ill. Avigdor now was saying college for his grandmother. So he said when she was still not well and she had terrible dementia, his mother calls him and crying, Bubby's gone. So Avigdor comes running right over to the house, and there's 4 police cars there. Well, was there some type of suspicion of foul play, a 97-year-old woman who's dying, or she was in her 90s. So when he went in, she told his mother, "I don't know where Bobby is." "What do you mean? She's upstairs in her bed. I thought you said she's gone." She said, "No, she went missing. She went walking, and we don't know where she is." So he told his mother, "Ma, you can't do that to me again. You have to be precise when it comes to this. Either deceased or lost. Gone is not a good word when we're discussing these things." So that's the Gemara. So now let's get into how this Hoich Kedei Dibor works. So let's learn it in the round. It's very, very beautiful. So first and foremost, I mentioned that Rav Ashi is not arguing on the Chilik of Stam and Mefarish. He's just giving us extra information that says even if it's a Mefarish, if it's Hoich Kedei Dibor, it'll still work. And that's how he explained the Bryce on top, which according to the first teretz, it was a doichik because it says Amr lo meitz ovet. And the first teretz had to say this was lav dafka. Now, even if it's dafka, it's not a problem because he found out that it was a son. So let's see the hilig around. Rav Ashi Makam Toich Kedei Dibor kan lach Kedei Dibor. Rav Ashi lo also laf lugei haydina de bestam. He's not arguing on the halacha of what he said in the first teretz. The vada moida by the yatsi de kriya. Of course, he's moida. Because he can't argue. He proved it from a brisa. The brisa was a haki. Behedja de bestam yatsa. Therefore, if that applies to kriya, so too by the Nedarim it would have the same rule, because we're just analyzing what the pasuk means by I saw, by al, by law. Ella. Rabbi is trying to accomplish not to have to say that the Bryce at the top of the Amid, when it said Meis Aviv, is Lav Dafka, because it says Meis Aviv. So therefore, he wants to say even if it wasn't Meis Aviv and it wasn't Mefarish, there's still a way where it can work. Therefore, Parak Shinuya Achrina the Mefarish Nami Mishkachas Law the Yot. How? Kol Shahidi U Shu Benoi. As long as they notify him of the right victim within Kedei Dibor, which is the amount of time it takes to say Taloim Alecha Rabbi Umayri, then it still counts. And I think I asked at the beginning of the year, what's up with that? Why not testing 1, 2, 3? So we're going to get into that. This same rule with Toich Dibur should apply to Afar and Akama. The Masnisin that our Mishnah is discussing, the Gedani Yachser v'Yofer, you have to be Mefer again. That's only That's only if he only found out a couple of seconds later that the first Afar was his daughter, not his wife, or vice versa. But if he knew it'll work. But Tanya B'Nichusa, and the Gemara brings support to this shot, and it says, he will not have to write Kriya again. Even though at the time of the Kriya, the person had not died yet, they were just gone, but not deceased. But I have a Kriya cloud, and it's not considered a Kriya. Since within a second or so of the Kriya, the mace died, command the Kara Hashdami. It's as if he writes Kriya now. So therefore, Kikara Nami Betos. So Yisava Shemeis Lemeis Acha. So who adin if he thought he was rising Kriya for the wrong mace, or Inami Hekim Hafar Betos, or he was Mekim or Mefer, thinking for the wrong person, Kivin Shiyada Toich Kadei Dibur Mahani. As long as he knows within that period of time, it helps. We don't yet know how it works. Now the Ran's going to really open everything up for us. This is a Shas Sugya. It's one of the Shas runs that we need to take with us from Nedarim. And you have to know that you need this because every time someone talks about it, say, the Bavustaran in Nedarim. It's all about being able to name drop. The whole purpose of learning Daf Yomi is that whenever someone tells you any word, you can always say, the Bavustaran. You know, what happens one day? What are you going to do one day if your son gets engaged to a Rosh Shiva's daughter? And you're going to be sitting there by the Vort, and he's going to start talking and learning. You feel like an idiot, right? It's very uncomfortable sitting there. My father was Mishadach with a big diet. Like, what are they going to talk about? It's very uncomfortable, right? So if you write down, you remember these main sugis. Every time he says about the Bavus around in the dorm, and then the big Talmud Chacham thinks, oh wow, he's a bigger Talmud Chacham than I am. So you have to have your arsenal ready.
Well, it's the other way. I'm going to be so wealthy. He's going to worry. What am I going to talk to him about? He'll brush up on sports.
That's also true. But you still want to beat him at his own game. It's still geschmack to beat him at his own game, even though he's uncomfortable. But he's thinking to himself, he's not. You're right. He was saying, I'm uncomfortable because you know all the stuff and you're so successful. But but at least you're uncomfortable because you don't know what I know. When you throw that out, that's a slam dunk. Then you ask Shiva, how much support are you looking for? First, you show him that you're a bigger Talmud Chacham than he is. About that support, what were you saying? No, it's nothing. Don't worry about it.
Then what happens when they start asking you more questions?
Okay, so that's a different story.
Maybe I didn't speak about anybody. Talk about the grandfathers.
Gesagt immer behilfto, hoch gedei dibur, he dibur dami, barb mekadef, ve'over avodas gechavim umekadesh umegar. Uperk yesh noich, sagt the Ran in Baba Basra, the Gemara teaches us that there's only two exceptions. Loichachev elatrei, bar me avodas gechavim v'kedusha. But sagt the Ran, those two incorporate all the four that we just mentioned. But like Ligi, the megadef bechlal over avodas gechavim. Surely Megadev is in the same category as doing avodah zarah. Umegarish bechlal mekadesh, and divorce is like mekadesh. We're talking about in yonim of marriage, the iska sheyitzia la'abaya, the same rules that apply to the woman on the way out. The gerushin applies to the woman on the way in, which is kedusha. Megadev. What is the definition of Megadev? Hanushim gidef. If he cursed Hakadosh Baruch Hu Rachman al-Atzlan, v'choyzer by toich kedei dibur, and he was choyzer. That's not a chazara. You get punished for it. And the same thing, that's the word we discussed a minute ago. And then he said, no, change your mind. It doesn't work. The same thing with the megalish and megarish. You can't say I read B'Kadesh to the Bas Yisrael and say, I change your mind. Doesn't work. First of all, Dr. Ran, I don't know why there should be a difference. And how do the Rabbanan, how does the Gemara know, in fact, that there is a difference? Where do they know it from? But near Beinai, Dr. Brown, I think it's all svara. The bishar mili by other things, and this is the aside of why there's a time delay. The bishar mili, the loy chamiri kulahai, most transactions that are not so serious, there's not a life sentence. Even when you do a maisa, you do a kinyan, you do anything that you might want to do, he's not really doing anything that he does with 100% conviction. Whenever a person does anything, he's never 100% sure about what he's doing, and in his mind, it takes 3 seconds till he actually confirms with full conviction what he really wanted to do. Therefore, whatever chalois, whatever he wants to do, wasn't really a thing until a second later. Avalhani, but when it comes to the Rebbeinu Shalom, or when it comes to a marriage, even the Chamiri Kilahai, since these are such serious issues, that 3 seconds that a person has to think about after, he does that before when it comes to these things, because these things are too serious. When you're doing a marriage, you're man sure that you know what you want. You're clear. And the same thing when you're giving a divorce. And of course, if someone is disrespectful to their Rebbeinu Shalom, before someone opens up a mouth like that, he's got to be, he for sure is very careful to be sure about it. Therefore, Chazara afilu toich dibur le'mahani. So this is the side of toich dibur. Nothing you do in your mind should even take effect until a second later, until it reaches that highest level of conviction. But these two types of things, ishus and avodah zarah, they're very, very severe, and the person thinks about them before. So this is a major shas round, because we know toich dibur kedibur dami is used all over shas. This is the aside. So when someone writes kriya to express his avelus, he's not fully expressing the avelus till 3 seconds later. So as long as he found out within 3 seconds, his expression of avelus will apply even to the son or to the father that he found out afterwards. However, that's not the only shot out there for toich dibur. The Ramban argues with me. For Isila Rabbeinu Moshe Bar Nachman Zal, for Berkish Neuchlin, Shekosav B'Shem Rabbeinu Tam, a different story. The toich dibur kedibur dami takanta takana bonon mishum talmud halakech mechach upagaboy rabbi sheyuchal litin l'shalom. Did it ever happen to you that you were at a teller in a bank and a prime mental prati comes right beside you to do a transaction, or a Shlomo Miller comes right beside you, or the Rov? Did it ever happen? Were you ever in a bank or a grocery line or anywhere, and a Rov suddenly shows up? Your Rosh Hashiva shows up. So I know what would happen to me. If I'm in the middle of a transaction and I'm in the middle of speaking to the teller and Rosh Hashiva comes, like I'll stop and say, hello, right? You don't want to ignore your Rosh Hashiva. So so people shouldn't ignore the Rebbeim, to have respect for the Rebbeim, they have to have the ability to have a 3 second cooling period for everything that they do, so that at any given moment, if a Rosh Hashiva comes, they can show respect. You see how in every nanosecond of our life, it all builds in respect for another person. That's all of our transactions, they're abundant modified. Put a time delay on just so that you could show respect to your Rosh Hashiva, to your Rebbe when he comes by.
Especially if it's your.
Or could be this applies even to a regular person. So you see how Chazal is so careful about Ben Adam Chaveroi to greet somebody that they modified every transaction. They're modifying it's a huge thing. The Rambam argues on it because of this, but they're literally delaying they're right, it's 100% al, and they're saying no, 3 second time delay. Why? Because we want you to be able to say Shalom Alecha Rebbe, Shalom Alecha Rebbe Umari, or Shalom Alecha Rebbe. So that's where that comes from.
Is it because distrust the processing of a man's mind that maybe before you're going to go make this commitment / neder, you're going to say something again that's putting your foot in the mouth. Think to yourself, Shalom Alecha Rebbe Umayri, that your Rebbe is standing in front of you. What should we say?
Would you say this if they were there? Very good. So you could put the two pshatim together, the pshat of the Ramban and the Ram together.
Right.
You're not really sure unless you would say it in front of your Rebbe. Very cute. So let's read this again. The toich dibur kedibur dami is at the kanto the tikkun rabbanon mishum talmud halakech mekach. He's in the middle of a transaction. Upagaboy rabbi, and suddenly his rabbi is there, he should totally be able to move away from what he's doing and say hello to his rabbi.
All you have to do.
I'm sorry? Well, if you're in the middle of a transaction. And then the hishrumi doisem b'chol mili bar mehan. And I think this applies to everything besides marriage. And besides Avodah Zarah, marriage is very simple. Why? Because you've said hello to your Rosh Yeshiva before you started. He was probably Misad Kedusha. So that's not a problem. Except for marriage and except for Avodah Zarah. Zokt around, I think this is not a good shot. Because think about it. I made a nether. They rise on me to keep that nether. Yet if I was choyjim teich l'dibur, the Rabbanan are saying, ignore your nether. Right? Break their hand. The chibezin masnin laker dover in the Torah lo'ilam b'kum v'asei b'nedarim. That means if I make a nether and I'm choyjim teich l'dibur, I'm allowed to violate that nether. Would the Rabbanan tell me to get up actively and violate a nether that I made because of this takana? So the Ran says that that's too schwer. Levade kedarim, this must be true. But from a Chassidus point of view, yes, the Rabban cared so much about the covenant for a Rebbe that yes, they're going to violate a deraisa b'kum v'asei so that someone should be able to say shalom aleichem to his Rebbe. So this is how you say this to Quran that we need to know about. Let's see the Gemara weiter.
Yeah,
Simple
for-
Gemara.
for Nedarim, you do a 3 second also.
Correct for everything,
Right,
everything except for
yeah,
marriage.
like heck.
Start calling it like ekos. Exactly. It's 3 second delay. Dr. Ela Gemara. Omar, she said.
Making a bracha, going to the ultimate, when you have a bracha technique dibur, whether it's Hamelach Hakadosh, all those ben adam l'makram also, you get to
3 seconds.
Right. Saint Alamotar. Omra koinim te'enim v'anovim elu v'ani toyemes. I'm asking upon myself figs and grapes. Kayim l'te'enim. And what if the husband said, I'm a kayim you nether for te'enim. I also don't want you to eat too many figs. The halacha is kula kayim. Automatically, his kiyim spreads to anovim, and she's not allowed to eat grapes either. But what if he was hofer l'te'enim? So this is another example of how you can't make the hekesh, because there's clearly a difference between ta'enim and anovim. What if hofer l'te'enim? He's only made for half the nether, but not the other half. Einei mufer, it's not a good afara. Ad sheyafer af lanov. So let's reread this line, and let me ask you what shot in this line is. If you made kiyum on part of a nether, the kiyum spreads to the whole nether. But if you made a fire on part of a nether, einei mufer ad sheyafer af lanov. So let me ask you a question. Is there afara on an oven? For sure, the afara will not work for the oven. He was only made for the tainim. But I want to know how you understand the words of this Mishnah. Did your afara work for the tainim? Do we say it's not afara at all until you're made for everything, and therefore it's not even afara for the tainim? Is that pshat in the Mishnah, or is pshat in the Mishnah? No, the afara on the tainim is good, but the afara on the novim won't be active until you make the afara on the novim themselves. How would you understand this Mishnah? Your afar is not good until you make for the novim. So is any mufar going on the anovim, or is any mufar going on the tainim? So in fact, the answer is two pshat. One pshat learns any mufar means sure the afar that you made on the be good. You made afar in the tainim. It's just that you weren't made for the novim. The other pshat is it's not a good afar at all until you're made for the whole nether. It's all or nothing, and therefore there's no afar even on the tainim. That's the two pshatim in the rap. Omra, koinim, ina shanita emes, va'anova shanita emes. So here, this is clearly not one nether. He articulated in such a way, ta'ina shanita emes, anova shanita emes. Clearly, these are two independent nedarim, harei shnei nedarim, and therefore, if he's only made for one or the other, it's either one or the other. It's only the nether that he was made for better or for worse. Zok to Gemara Mani Mesnis, our Mishnah, who holds that by hafara and akama, there's a difference in halacha between hafara and akama. And by hafara, you have to be made for the whole nether. And by akama, you only have to be made for part of the nether. Who is the author of our Mishnah? Rabbi Shmuel. Because we're going to quote now a three-way machlokes, and Rabbi Shmuel is one of the three ways that our Mishnah is consistent with. The Tanya we learned. It says in the pasuk, Isha yikimenu v'isha yefirenu. Our hekesh Amra. So therefore, if she said kodim teinim v'anovim elu shani teyemes and kaim lo teinim kulei kaim, exactly like our Mishnah. Zok the Gemara in our base Hafar l'tainim, if he made a far on the tainim, then it's eine mufer achiyofer afla novim divrei Rabbi Shmuel. So this illustrates how our Mishnah is consistent with the Shita of Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Kiva has a dissenting opinion. Rabbi Kiva says, Hareyu Omer, we need to compare the two and say they're exactly alike. It says in the pasuk, Isha Yikimenu, Visha Yefirenu. So let's apply the hekesh. Ma Yikimenu Mimenu. When it says Isha Yikimenu, even part of the neder you could be Mekayim. Af Yefirenu Mimenu. So too, by Hafara, you could even be made for part of the neder. So clearly, Rabbi Kiva is saying is, if you made for part of the neder, it will work. Depending on how he understood the Mishnah, he's either saying that it should work on the part that you were made for, or maybe it means he should even work on the part that you're not made for. We're going to soon see that Rabbi Kiva is saying it should even work on the part that you weren't made for, just like your akama works on the part that you were not mekayim. Okay, beautiful. Now I'm just going to ask. I don't know the answer. How do you know ma yikimenu mimenu? How do you know that if you're mekayim, even part of the nether, it works? Where do you know it from? I'm going to suggest, like the Ran says, ma yikimenu mimenu the mashma the b'miktzatzoi the hainu mimenu hukum kuloi. Mashma even part of it. The yikimenu hachamash. The word yikimenu itself means yikimenu. It's like a double word. Yokem mimenu. So the word itself is telling us that even being mekayim a portion of the nether would work to be mekayim the whole nether. Yefirenu definitely does not have that much mois. But using the hekesh, Rabbi Kiva wants to say that what we've seen by hakama should equally apply to Hafara. Rabbi Shmuel, correct Rabbi Shmuel, I don't like your hekesh, Rabbi Kiva. You know why? Miksiv yofer mimenu. By Hafara, it doesn't have that connotation. And I don't think you should apply what you learned by hakama and apply it to Hafara. Rabbi Kiva says, I disagree. I believe you can make that hekesh. Makesh hafara la'akama. Ma hakama mimenu, even partial hakama is making the whole nether. Afafara mimenu, even a partial hafara is made for the whole nether. This brayta brings two shitas, but you should know there's a third opinion. There's a third opinion that agrees with Rabbi Kiva's hekesh, but he says, who said you should learn hafara from hakama? Maybe learn hakama from hafara. Just like by hafara, only what you were made for works, and what you were not made for, there's no hafara on. Hakama mashakiyim kaim. So you see that at least by hafara, the chachamim learn that if you were made for one out of the two, the hafara will work for the one that you made. Right? In the Tanakama, in Rabbi Shmuel, we're not sure. But in the Chachamim, it's clear that the hafara for sure works for what you were made for. It just doesn't work for what you were made for. And therefore, Kiyum should work the same way. So therefore, we have a three-way machlokes. Either by a part of kama is good, but a part of hafara is not good. That's our mission, that's Rabbi Shmuel. Or you have Rabbi Kiva, that a part of kama and a part of hafara are the same, they both work. Or the Chachamim, that a part of kama and part of hafara both don't work. Gewaltig. Zog the Mishnah weiter.
I feel like we had this tomorrow. A different part. We talked about splitting it.
Well, we learned about splitting hafaras where it's in time, meaning for before they were married, after they were married. But in a neder that had two parts to it, I think what you're referring to is Naziris, because Naziris encompasses both an Isser to become Tomei, as well as an Isser to drink wine, as well as an Isser to eat grape skins and seeds. And the Gemara said that his afara on only work on things that are inu nefesh. So therefore, the Gemara suggested wine is inu nefesh, but the skins and the seeds, those aren't inu nefesh to not to eat those. So the Gemara said, "Ein nazir shlachatzoyin." Right? The Gemara asked the same question with not being metamal mace. Not being metamal mace is not inu nefesh. So how does afara work for that? So the Gemara could have either answered ein nazir shlachatzoyin, but the Rad says when it comes to the issue to become tummy, you can't say that because Nazir Shimshin is in fact in Naziris that does not include an issue tumah. But the other svara that the Gemara said was not going to a levaya is inu nefesh because people want to go to levayas. Because if I don't go to your levaya, you won't come to mine, right? Even though if I go to your levaya, you for sure can't come to mine. But it means people aren't going to come to mine. Gewaltig. Now we're going to chazer another sugi that we learned before. Amar Kanim Tainis. So our Mishnah says very clearly that the only way it's considered two separate Nedarim is if it's clearly articulated as two separate Nedarim. Amar Rava, you know who holds of this halacha? Masnizin Rab Shimoni. Rab Shimon said this lagabe shvuos hapikot. The Amar Achiyom shvuo l'chol echad ve'echad. The halacha is if you have a pekaton of mine and I say you have my pekaton, you have my watch, I'd like it back, and you deny and say no, you don't have it, and you make a shavua to me that you didn't have it, then if it turns out you're lying, you have to bring a carbon, and there's I think it's a carbon. There's a whole there's a bunch of punishments. So what happens if 5 people go over to you? 5 people go over to you. 5 people go to Reuven. 5 people say you have a pekaton of ours, and he said shavua that I don't have your pekaton. Ulacha. Rab Shimon said there's only one chiyuv over here for the shavuos of pekaton because you made one shavua. Even though you itemized each person, it doesn't make a difference. The Rabbanan hold that no, since you said lecha, it's as if you made 5 shavuos. Rab Shimon says unless you said shavua lecha, unless you said it like that, it wouldn't be 5 shavuos. So that's similar to what our Tana is saying. Our Tana is saying is even if she said koinim shalaetim anovim ute'enim, it's one other. But if you said koinim she'eni toyim te'enim ve'eni toyim anovim, you articulated a special eni toyim on each species. Only then do we say it's a separate nether, which is consistent with Rab Shimon, and in fact. Around, I told you earlier on Daf Samach Vav that we paskin halacha l'maisa like Reb Shimon. Mishnah. What happens if a husband says, I know my wife made nedarim, but I never knew that there's a halacha that I could be made for. I just found out 3 days later, so I found out on Monday that she made a nether. The day expired, but I didn't know until Wednesday that I'm able to be made for. He could still be made for. Why? Because the idea that he had, which was we'll call it a mixas idea, he knew there was a nether, but he didn't know that it could be made for. So he had some knowledge, but not enough knowledge. That doesn't say his time didn't expire. The idea mu'etes that he had, or the mixas idea that he had, meaning he only knew there was a nether, but he didn't know that you could be made for. That doesn't start the clock ticking. And from when he finds out that he could be made for the nether, so when he had a 100% idea of the whole situation, that's when the clock starts to tick. What if he said, I knew I could be made for Nedarim. On Monday, when I found out about my wife's nether, I knew I could be made for. And I knew about the nether that she made. But I didn't know that this was the type of nether that I could be made for. I didn't know that this was in an effort. I didn't know it was Beinay. So I had more knowledge than in the first case, but still not 100% of the knowledge that I need. But I didn't know that this is a nether that could be made for. Reb Meir holds you cannot be made for. So there's actually a shaila. There's 2 pshatim again in the Ram as to what this means. Does lo yafer mean he wouldn't have been able to be made for that same day, or does it mean he can't be made for later on? In other words, the idea, the mixus idea that he had, is it enough of a idea that the clock started to tick? But it's not enough of a yediyah to actually be made for, because you have to know about the nether to be made for. If you say that it's enough of a yediyah that the clock starts to tick, but it's not enough of a yediyah to be made for, which means I couldn't be made for it not before, not after. That's one pshat in Reb Meir. There's another pshat in Reb Meir's lo yofer, meaning it wasn't enough of a yediyah to be made for, but in the future I might be able to be made for. So there's a shaila on what Reb Meir holds. We'll get into it in detail tomorrow. I just wanted to introduce this question in the Mishnah. The Chacham holds you could be made for. Again, there's going to be a shaila. What does it mean you can be made for? You can be made for before, you can be made for after. We'll get into that, and that'll get us into the next sugya. So we'll stop here, Hashem, and we will mamshech tomorrow. Have a wonderful, wonderful Shabbos. I know we're going to have a good week. Parai's going to have a very bad Shabbos this week. Parai, he's going to dumb. It was a rough week for him this week. It will be okay. Wonderful Shabbos.